Welcome to Get Over It, the consciousness transforming podcast for exceptional 21st century living. Folks, we've got a different show today, and it's going to be very, very interesting. We're going to be speaking with Richard Grossinger about his latest book, Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms, Cosmogenesis from the Big Bang to Octopus and Crow Intelligence to UFOs. And as you're listening to that, you're like, oh, how could he manage to put all of this together? He does it very succinctly, and you're going to learn a lot. So sit back, relax, enjoy some information, and then afterwards go get the book, because it's a very, very interesting read. The information shared on Get Over It uses intuitive and pragmatic insight to help you shift your consciousness to break through blocks and release energy that is no longer needed. Yes, we're going to help you let go of the BS that is holding you back. But you guys know I always ask that question, are you truly ready to? And by the way, folks, BS is belief system. A bit about me for my new listeners: intuitive since birth. I'm a third generation intuitive with over 3 decades of experience supporting people to break through the blocks along their path. I'm a strategist for personal and professional transformation, revealing cutting-edge information that enables you to prosper and thrive. I spent 25 successful years in corporate America as an executive sales professional, and I'm the founder of Healing Visions Ministries and the Northern California Children's Education Network, a 501c3 nonprofit. I provide consultations and healings in all areas of life that heal the mind-body-spirit connection, allowing you to live your very best life. My clients tell me that I keep it real while providing them with accurate information to assist them along their journey as a spirit living a human existence. But they also say, if you really don't want to know, don't ask Monique. My background includes a doctorate in metaphysics, Reiki master teacher, ordained minister, and clinical hypnotherapist. So whether you are stressed, depressed, or possessed, I can help. To find out more about me and the services I offer, go to my website, and that's MoniqueChapman.com. And I invite you to like me on Facebook and follow me on LinkedIn. My guest today, Richard Grossinger, is the curator of Sacred Planet Books at Inner Traditions and the founder and former publisher of North Atlantic Books, He has a PhD in ecological anthropology and has written more than 40 books on alternative medicine, cosmology, embryology, and consciousness, including Dark Pool of Night, Reality and Consciousness, The Night Sky, Soul and Cosmos, and Bottoming Out the Universe. He lives in Bar Harbor, Maine, and you can check him out at his website, and that's richardgrossinger.com, RICHARDGROSSINGER.com. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Monique.
Hey, it's so great to have you here today. With everything that you have done, why this book and why this book now?
Okay. Well, it's interesting how if you follow a trail, eventually the trail guides you. Some aspects of this book I've been working on since the 60s in high school, and other aspects have evolved just through going through different layers of things. Mm-hmm. I went through a sequence of books through the 70s, 80s, 90s, into the 2000s on healing, then astronomy, cosmology, then embryology, and then consciousness. And subsequently, I tried to pull the threads together and come to an understanding of the big picture, the bigger picture, that doesn't break it so much down into topics. And it also reflects the fact that beginning in 2008, I began to do, this is more your domain, I began to do a psychic study, and that shifted my whole orientation from a more intellectual viewpoint to a more kind of imaginal and psychic viewpoint. And so this book also represented my joining of Inner Traditions. I was trying to bring my themes together with inner traditions themes. And this book kind of came a bit from a back and forth between the editorial group and the publisher and marketing people and me as to what would come next in my own writing that also matched areas that they were interested in. And I think Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms are more what I've been working with, especially Thoughtforms, because if you do psychic work, you're right on the borderline between sort of matter and psyche, or matter and consciousness. Whereas the Big Bang, Octopus and Crow Intelligence, and UFOs are topics that I chose to highlight within the book to complement some of the work I was doing, collecting books for Sacred Planet Books. I've been doing that, I guess it's approaching 3 years now. It's maybe 2 2/3 years. After 55 years doing my own publishing company, a lot of them with my wife, Lindy, I joined Inner Traditions just two plus years ago. And since then, I brought in roughly 100 books.
Congratulations.
And in that process, I've really redefined my own work to myself. And at the same time, kind of opened up a new avenue of publishing for them, somewhat overlapping what they were doing already. And so this book falls in among all that stuff. It reflects elements of Sacred Planet Books. It reflects elements of my past work, and it reflects elements of where I am now, which is like every other human being in this world, trying not only to figure out who and where they are, but to understand kind of our destiny, our nature, our destiny. I think what's sometimes been called the truth mystery, that thing that is kind of the ultimate truth or true self, and yet the mystery, because we're in a realm where it's not revealed. We have to kind of figure it out almost moment to moment as we go.
Well, since we are living in such a non-linear world, although a lot of people think that we're living in a linear world, is it easier to connect to that truth mystery being non-linear if we're open, if we expand ourselves and open to that energy?
I think so, although, and I take this view in both the Inner Traditions books I did, that it's impossible to escape it. Even the most linear thinking and the most ordinary activities that people do that they think of as like their day jobs are inquiries. You can't get separate of it because you're always creating context.
Okay. Now I want to back up a minute because you talked about, the title itself, Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms. So explain to us, so that we're all on the same page, what you consider Dreamtime to be, what you consider a thought form to be, and then we'll take it from there.
I took Dreamtimes from the Australian Aborigine notion of an interface between the landscape and the perception of the landscape, the kind of phenomenology of the landscape. As I understand it, and there is a particular Australian Aboriginal view of this, which I'm never going to get as an outsider, but as a borrower of it, I would say that the dream time is the point at which we, by our actions, create the landscape that we're in. And it's like a dream in that we dream it, but it isn't a dream that we can escape or wake up from, at least not within the lifetime. And it is a a dream that completely fuses with the world around us. So that one way of looking at this world or even this universe is as the collective dreaming or dream time of all the entities in it, which more approaches, I think, the real complexity of reality than the things that kind of advanced physicists throw out and say, well, this is everything there is. It is only if you don't take into account the forms that appear in consciousness and the fact that there are conscious entities in the universe. In many of my books, I've run through conventional science, meaning physics and biology's explanation for consciousness, and it doesn't ever seem to me as though it's an explanation. And thought forms, it's similar. I got the word thought forms from my own psychic training with John Friedlander, in which we create visualizations that we then activate. And those visualizations, if I think as you train to be able to organize them, begin to shape your reality. And yet I also think that in light of what I said about Dreamtimes, that there are collective thought forms in which groups of individuals kind of collaborate to create a reality. And so in the title, Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms, I'm expressing an intention to talk about the ways we create and participate in this reality ourselves. The usual, I mean, the more kind of conventional thing is to assume that we bounce around a little bit fortuitously with good and bad luck, and we end up where we do. But the more esoteric view is that all of this represents an agreement that we made in another dimension, in a dimension with more layers or aspects. We made an agreement to participate in this sort of world, and then we brought that agreement in and participated in creating that world. And I think that, in a sense, one could explain the entire world as, well, I'm repeating what I said earlier, maybe in a slightly different way, a collaboration of all the forms in it. But in that, I would call it even not a reality as much as a probability, because it keeps changing as the individual's contribution to it changes. And at any given moment, there are multiple probabilities that can emerge from this point, but then one of them does. And the other probabilities in John Friedlander's, at least in part, a Sethian, in a Sethian cosmology, those other realities don't entirely disappear. They continue, the unfulfilled probabilities continue to manifest in some other form, and we're vaguely or dimly aware of them.
Okay, so when you say they manifest, that would be in a different dimension, so to speak?
I guess you could say that. The words sometimes limit it. You could say dimension or plane or frequency. You must run into I mean, your own work must go back and forth over this borderline. I'm guessing from your description that what you do, in a sense, is you guide people through their own thought forms into larger views and expressions of themselves that exist at a different frequency or in another dimension.
Right, and you help them get there if they're willing to get there. And it's amazing that some people, they want so much, but they're not willing to do the work, or they're not willing to go within to achieve what they say that they want to achieve.
it reminds me of a kind of funky teacher I met in Kauai at one point who had I don't know what you'd call it. It was almost like a parable that he recorded in which you come into this big Roman amphitheater, and you're like the gladiator who has to face the dragon or the lion or whatever. And in the audience are all your guides and all the people, all the kind of angels and spirits who watch over this dimension. And he goes on to list all the kind of lions or monsters that come out to face you. And they are like fear and anxiety and envy and hatred. I mean, I can't remember all of them. And then after these are all defeated comes the biggest and most sort of challenging foe of all. And you sort of hold your breath and he draws it out until you find out that what that is self-sabotage. And in a sense, it's what like Freud and Reich called resistance. You sometimes, and in fact, many people often resist the very thing they want the most, and that's characteristic of this level of reality. I think it's what gives it texture and depth and meaning. If we didn't resist it, if we just kind of got whooshed on through in perfect harmony with our wishes and desires, it wouldn't be much of a reality. We'd be in and out of it very quickly and somewhat bored. But with the amount of density and resistance that is here, there's a really profound learning experience.
Okay. Well, talk to us a moment about reality and talk to us about universes, because you've written that souls and spirits travel between realities, whereas universes are generally sealed. What do you mean by that?
I suppose I must have written that. I think that
or your publicist wrote it, one or the other.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I think that, well, let me refer to back in 2019, I was at a conference, a kind of very small conference, like only about a dozen people were there at MIT, in which they were discussing propulsion. Propulsion for UFOs or vehicles between solar systems and galaxies. And the forum was to find ways of propulsion that could get beings or entities from one solar system or even more from one galaxy to another within a biological time frame, which is not even close to possible. It would take millions of lifetimes for any entity to get even to another Earth-like planet somewhere. So they were arguing, since many of the scientists there believed that aliens had already been here, that there must be a propulsion system. And that's universes. And I think realities are more probably what this is about, which is that you need a shift in the whole meaning, the whole dimensionality of what you're dealing with in order to cross this universe, that it's not as it seemed. You had mentioned before the show, we might talk about UFOs. I would take the position that it's not certain, but quite possible that UFOs represent entities or intelligences traveling outside this universe or between points in this universe, but using an outside dimension to cross it. And that's why they can't really be resolved in our in our reality. Well, they can't be resolved in our universe, but they do resolve in our field of reality.
Okay, so based on what you said, then could the UFOs that we sometimes see, could there be many more that we miss because we're just not looking for them or in tune with what's going on?
I suppose I haven't thought about it exactly that way, but I suppose just by the principle that I kind of think that most of what's going on we miss, so why not? We probably miss them too. I think that what we miss, and this comes from my study with John a lot, is we miss the spirits and what he calls elements of a multi-personhood. We miss the larger entity. We miss the group soul that we're part of. We miss our own causal soul, and we miss the kind of conscious, subconscious more than conscious entity that brings together beings in different dimensions and also multiple beings on this world. We feel very isolated and alone in our kind of sovereignty and individuality, whereas it may be that we're participating with other beings and entities, and that they're feeding our consciousness subliminally. And that's the main thing I think of us being unaware of. And yet I imagine that we're unaware of, UFOs, we're unaware of highways and travelers elsewhere, probably astral and other travelers using different planes. Yeah, I've kind of had to work that around to my own terminology.
Okay, that's just fine. In your book, you talk about something that kind of really caught my attention, and that was the scam of the light. The scam of the being of light. So what is that about?
That's probably the hardest thing that's kind of like my favorite thing in the book, and also the hardest thing to find. I began as a literary writer in a tradition of avant-garde literature, and I've learned since then to kind of occupy a bit of an interface between kind of what I used to call in my 20s and 30s experimental prose and the more expository prose I write now. But occasionally, I just want to get at something that you can't get at through expository prose. So I have a section in this book, which I essentially took out of a journal about a dream, which linked through multiple synchronicities to a whole bunch of ideas. And I called it the dream of the being of light. And it had all the paradoxical elements of a dream in that it's been a while since I've actually thought about this dream or the writing about it. But I remember it starts with an attempt to resolve a scam. Either, I think as a dreamer, you can be caught up in a kind of duality between whether you're the person perpetrating the scam or whether you're trying to expose it. And you end up kind of being both. And that's the sort of dream it is. Eventually, the scam is that this entity called the being of light is really being perpetrated as a fraud, either by me or I'm trying to expose the fraud. It's unclear which. And I go back and forth in my own ambivalence through the dream. And in the process of trying to expose the fraud, I end up kind of getting sucked into the wanting to keep the dream going and wanting to fool my audience, which is really myself as the dreamer. Only I don't think of it that way because there's an audience within the dream that's being fooled by this being of light, which is no more than a kind of carnival doll, a woman dressed up as if to be a being of light. And I use this to kind of pan out into a larger framework of that particular moment. I dreamed this right at the beginning of the pandemic. And right before I tried to drive out of sort of lockdown for the first time to visit somebody. I was back in Northern California at that time. You referred to that before the show began. I was driving to Petaluma to visit a friend and author. And at the same time, I was talking to a psychic, an astrologer who I've known since the 1970s on the phone. And I was also at the same time dealing with a depression that had gone on for about a year, about 2 years by then. I didn't know that I was nearing the end of it. I didn't think that there would ever be an end. But the pandemic and the sudden lockdown and the whole confusion of, it really confused identity, had kind of put me in a sort of reverberating space between my own depression and the pandemic. And then the dream was very lucid, so it was pushing in. And the psychic astrologer, Elias Lonsdale, and I ended up discussing suicide. My mother, brother, and sister all committed suicide in their 50s and 60s. And I come from the same family, and I've dealt with some of the same demons that they have, but not in the same way. I viewed it more as guidance, that the darkness is guidance. And yet it's a topic I discuss. You can't not be interested in it if your most intimate family members all decide to do that to themselves.
Right.
Elias was making the argument to me, the fallacy. He was arguing. He always has such great insights. Like when I went into the depression in mid 2018, he said, "You don't get to go from one comfort zone to another." That is, there's a price to pay in between, which is what that was. I was moving from one whole kind of realm of my life to another, to an awakening, but I couldn't do it without passing through the abyss in between. And part of that abyss involved having to see the publishing company that my wife and I started as teenagers and developed be taken over by a hostile coup and sort of vandalized and ruined. And that had happened right before the pandemic began. So all of this was underlying the dream and my thoughts at the time. And then Elias said, if I remember right, and I write it more articulately in the book, that the reason that suicide doesn't work is it doesn't get you from one place to the next place in a linear sense, because there isn't any such lineup. In a way, all of these places are happening simultaneously. So there isn't a way to escape. One of the most predominant features of this reality is that it doesn't give you an alternative, which is a more fundamental thing than people sometimes think. I think when they're doing well or happy or, enjoying the reality, that it doesn't occur to them. But then if they get unhappy, even before they get suicidal, say, that it's a kind of squirmy position, like, well, where's the alternative? How do I change this? That's sort of what you must do in working with people. You work with people right on that threshold. And I think when the person comes to the existential decision of whether to try and leave this place, and in the case of my brother and sister, my brother in 2005 and my sister in 2016, I talked to them up to the last day. And in neither case did I believe that they were going to commit suicide. My sister jumped out the same window in New York City that my mother did 41 years earlier.
Oh, wow.
And my brother actually stabbed himself to death with a knife. That's pretty heavy. And how do you do that? How do you bring yourself to that moment? And Elias was arguing, well, there's this illusion that you do something like that, and then the next thing happens, which I think most people feel is nothing. It just all stops, which means the pain stops. But
not necessarily.
But if time is not linear,
Mm-hmm.
and consciousness is not tied to matter, then a very different shift occurs, and you create a whole new set of problems because you've, in a sense, begun to manipulate the projection of all realities. And then that's a little bit like the dream, in which I don't realize whether I'm the perpetrator or the victim of the scam, and how I'm gonna either keep it going or get out of it. And I also relate the scam to another feature of my family. I say this in the book too, that it's the trick played on me by my family, apart from the suicides, which I guess you could say is another trick in a way. And that is that for my first 9 years, I thought one person was my father and had his last name. And then when I was 9, it got changed to what my last name is now. And this other person became my father. And he lived actually closer to where you come from, in the Catskills. So I used to visit him back and forth between New York City and his hotel. And then when I was 30, at the time of my mother's suicide, it came out that she had me by an affair, and neither person was my father.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a multiple trick on me, a multiple scam. And I never did meet the actual person. But it was very strange when I went out to try and find him, because I had already done that with a whole second family. I'd already absorbed a whole second family at age 9 and taken on a new brother and sister, and 2 new brothers rather. And they turned out they were adopted, so they weren't genetic, but they turned out not even to be my true half brothers, or I should say my blood. Well, blood's the wrong. I'm getting so caught up in the scam of the being of light that I would have to stop and try and find language for this. But anyway, the old form of experimental writing, which I did, was very caught up in trying to capture ambiguities and energetic transitions between systems in language, as a poet would. It was very close to poetry. And probably the first 20 or so books I did were simply experimental prose. Early ones published by this literary press called Black Sparrow. And then eventually, when I was about 30, Saturn return, 32, 33, when I quit college teaching, which I had done in Maine and Vermont, and moved to Berkeley, to California, near where you are now, and pursued learning healing systems, and eventually adapting our publishing company so that it became a sort of mind, body, spirit publisher. And then we stayed because we were earning a living there, and we raised our kids there. And all of this it's like I try and capture all of this by putting in the book this one dream and then the various interpolations of the dream. And I think it works pretty well because it's a book that it's not about, the book is more trying to get the reader to experience in themselves the shift between levels of reality. And I kind of do that by talking about my own insights into that. Perhaps one of the most interesting things in the book, to me, perhaps the seminal point of the book, comes out of a dialogue I've had for the last few years with a guy who's a psychotherapist in Berkeley and also a publisher, Matt McKay, who's the publisher of New Harbinger. And I've published 2 of his books with Sacred Planet and Inner Traditions, and have a 3rd on the way. And Matt, New Harbinger purchased Non-Duality Press at one point, and Matt got very involved in essentially a range of Buddhist publications around the topic of non-duality. And I'm not doing it justice here, but I think I did in my book. The problem with non-duality is that this reality has to be accounted for. That is, it doesn't seem to work, at least it doesn't to me or him, to say that this whole reality we're in is either unenlightened or a mistake or something that our main mission should be to dissolve it and get somewhere better. Because there must be tremendous forces, forces like that the word karma kind of alludes to, like karmic and akashic forces, putting this exact world into existence in every detail of itself. And that this world seems to require that it be inhabited fully, so that you can have at one seeming extreme a yogi or a llama performing operations which raise them up through the levels of this world to the brink of another world, but you have somebody else working in the street with a drill trying to get down to the sewer system, or somebody driving a truck across country, and they are just as much participating in the psychospiritual vibration. And that's and that seems to me the essential nature of it. And it's a primary theme through both of those books. I in no way mean to challenge Buddhism, because it's, for one, it's the most sophisticated description of reality and practice that we have. It's more that the way it gets interpreted and practiced leads to a kind of trashing of this reality or a demotion of this reality. And that's a dialogue Matt and I have been having for about 2.5 years now. And it very deeply informed my writing in this book. And I kind of did sweeps to go out from there and capture things like UFOs and octopuses and crows and water and crystals and all sorts of things. The book very much felt to me like almost like a collection of treasures. You know, when I did my first, this is, I think, the 4th or 5th podcast I've done on it. And the first one was maybe 2 or 3 months ago. And what came up immediately for me and for the interviewer was the fact that this book is weird. It feels as though it was written in a spell. So when I tried to read it before the interview, I was appalled because it wasn't that I didn't understand what I was saying. I couldn't get into the rhythm of it. It was like a jazz that I couldn't pick up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the moment I picked it up, I thought it was remarkable and really strange and weird. And the interviewer had exactly the same perception. He started to read the book and was kind of felt outside it and like he didn't understand it. And then he suddenly got it and it became completely interesting to him.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, it's not that I would call it channeled in the sense, and you see, I wrote about this right at the beginning.
Yes.
Because when the publicity department of Intertradition sent out copies, they made a galley and I sent it out. I kind of got a little perversely creative and sent it to pretty much every email address I could find on in my inbox and in my inbox file going back like 10 years just to see what would happen. And I obviously got somebody who didn't like my work because he wrote the scathing critique of it. And I put that in my preface because it was so interesting. It immediately keyed me to the fact that the book was strange. And I thought, it's not channeled in the sense that I think it came from another entity. Maybe it did. I just will be agnostic on that. It's channeled in the sense that it's operating at its own rhythm. And when I'm in the rhythm, it's like a cornucopia. All sorts of things come out, and an octopus and a crow and a tardigrade can be all together. And when I leave the frequency, it seems somewhat amorphous and fragmented, and I don't hear the music. So it's a little bit reminiscent of the experimental prose I did early on, where I would read it. I'd get invited to read it. This is like mostly in the 70s at colleges. And either myself or as part of a poetry reading, people didn't even know it wasn't poetry. It was prose with poetry-like rhythms, and it would take me a while to hear my own song, as it were.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with that, because when I was first reading it, I'm like, okay, where's this going? And, as a reviewer of books, sometimes you skim, sometimes you read. And the way that I choose a book is I'll randomly open to 3 different pages and read the rest of the chapter. And
me too, yeah.
Yeah, the first one the first part that I opened is like, okay, well, this isn't making sense to me. But as I got to the second section that I opened, I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. So it allows your subconscious mind, or at least my subconscious mind, to think about it and not accept or reject, but just to absorb the information. So I think you did a great job there. But, Richard, our time is almost up. Give us a pearl of wisdom that you would love to share with our audience today. Time has gone so quickly.
Oh, wow. What would I say? I think the most recent thing that I've thought about, that I've been working with, is something that actually came from a Buddhist source, which is that all joy that we experience comes from inside ourselves. And yet it's so habitual to associate it with the things that give us joy, especially the people that give us joy. But if we can hold both together, that's the trick, to realize that it comes from ourselves, but also to enjoy completely indulgently the thing or the person that's giving us joy. That's, I think, what turns on the outpouring of joy back. Okay.
Yes, it does. And thank you very much for sharing that. And I really appreciate you, Richard, coming on and sharing the information in this wonderful book, Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms. And to the audience, thank you for being with us as we collectively get over it. And everyone, please remember that the most important choice that you can make is what you choose to make important. Consider making the masterful choice of discovering Dreamtimes and Thoughtforms. Abundant blessings, light and love to all. Agape.
Thanks, Ruth.
You're